presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, Kevin Stone. And tonight, we are joined by Dakota Randall. Dakota, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How you guys doing?
Good. Good. I know that you had a busy weekend and it took you a little bit of time to get home, but we do appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight and talk some Pats and New England football. And before we start the conversation, I do want to remind you that if you're in the market to purchase your first home, sell your current home and purchase your next home, or refinance, give our good friend Herb Devine a call at 781-254-2846. You can also shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. With over 27 years of experience, Herb has the knowledge and the know-how that you need to enter the real estate market. With the spring market here, it's the busiest time of the year. You need experience in your corner. Well, that's Herb Devine. He can do it all. Again, give him a call at 781-254-2846 or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. All right, gentlemen, obviously it's been a busy week here in the NFL, specifically for the Patriots. Of course, going into free agency, the Patriots had about $130 million to spend. Seems like they pretty much spent every penny of that, signing 13 free agents. Dakota, I want to start off with just some overall thoughts on what they did in free agency. I'm not going to ask you to give a grade per se, but are you happy with what they did? Could they have done more in certain areas? What are your overall thoughts on what they did last week in free agency?
Yeah, I think my overall take is that I think the Patriots played the hand they were dealt very well. Ideally, you would have loved for them to come out of this period with a top receiver or something approximating that and a top left tackle, but I'm just not sure those kind of players were available. And if they were available, I'm just not sure how realistic it was that they were going to come here. I think Chris Godwin, it seems like he just wasn't going to leave Tampa unless it was something truly ridiculous. And the Patriots, by all indications, were going to get close to that at $30 million, but it still wasn't good enough. And then once Ronnie Stanley came off the market, I don't think many of the options, if any of them, really were that big of an upgrade over Vidarian Lowe. And I think that's more of a commentary on them than Vidarian Lowe. I just think, so the Patriots can't just throw around money for the sake of it. I think oftentimes fans sort of talk that way, is if you just got to pay somebody for the sake of it. And I don't think they could do that. So I think what they were able to do was take advantage of a free agent class rich in defensive talent at areas of need. And I think they improved at all three levels. So I just think overall they've raised the ceiling of the team this week, but by no means do I think they're finished. I think clearly there's work to do in the draft. I still think, there's a long way to go on the receiver thing. We'll see how that progresses throughout the spring, maybe even to the summer. Remember how late the Brandon Ayuk stuff happened last year. So unfinished, but as far as, what they were able to do and what was realistic to accomplish in free agency, I think they did a really good job, especially on defense, obviously.
Yeah, I'm with you. We hit on this last week. For me, it was about navigating that second and third tier, which you just talked about, which I think they did pretty well. And then in terms of spending money, look, you didn't get that huge, splash name, but you got the best defensive player on the board, and right. Some pretty damn good players around him as well. So, yeah, all things considered, I'm with you. I think it's been positive so far. You're right. They can't be done. Elliot Wolf said as much last week at that sort of awkward press conference, but they know there's still work to be done. But right now, if you're a fan, it's hard to complain about what they've done.
Yeah. And the one thing I would add is just, people are still talking about receiver, but who outside of Chris Godwin, who could they have gotten? I just don't.
Right, in free agency. Right.
Yeah, that would have even made sense. I think Cooper Kupp, I liked the locker room fit more than I liked the on-field fit. And maybe with Devontae Adams, the reverse, right? And so I'm just not sure how much was there. So I think it's hold out for a trade if one comes together.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I do want to push back on something you said, Kevin, about tiers. They added the top free agent in free agency. Milton Williams was the top free agent in the class. Carlton Davis, you can make the case most teams liked him more than Charvarius Ward. So he was the top corner in the class, if not certainly the second best corner in the class. I do think they added top-tier talent. Again, I think it comes back to what we've been talking about for the past week. They didn't add it at positions of need, and I think that's the difference. I think, when you look at the wide receiver piece, yeah, I agree. I'm not so sure Cooper Kupp would have been a fit here. I think that this system that McDaniels is going to run is going to be pretty flexible, but I just don't know how much of a fit he would have been. And at this stage of the game, pushing 30 with his recent injury history, the Seahawks did overpay for him at $15 million a year. I'm not sure he would have given you that much more than what you already have. He's certainly not the player he was 3 years ago when he had that record-breaking season. As far as left tackles is concerned, and Dakota, you touched on this. I think once Ronnie Stanley took what looks like kind of a hometown discount to stay with the Ravens, I think once that happened, and I do think he was a primary target of theirs, I think once that happened, that's when they probably decided, all right, you know what? We're not going to overspend for a Cam Robinson, who statistically was worse than Vidarian Lowe last year. We're not going to overspend for a Dan Moore like Tennessee did. I mean, that might have been the worst contract anybody gave anybody. They're going to regret that deal in 2 years.
Yeah.
So I think that, you touched on something that I think is very true, that they played the card that they were dealt. And at the end of the day, once it became apparent that they couldn't upgrade in those areas, they did the next best thing, which was to upgrade a defense that, quite frankly, has not been very good the last 2 years. I know people will look at the statistics from 2 years ago in Belichick's last year and say, well, statistically, they were pretty good and they played well down the stretch. They weren't good in a lot of games that year. People forget the New Orleans Saints, who have been pretty bad the last 3 years, came in here that year and hung 34 on them. So, again, I think it's easy to say that because of the Belichick effect, that the defense has always been solid, but the defense had some holes, and they needed to do what they did on that side of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I like the most about what they did on defense is, they added good players at areas that made sense. Like, they didn't need a franchise cornerback or anything like that. They needed a good, solid, tough number 2 that could complement Christian Gonzalez, and they got that. There wasn't a path really here to get a franchise middle linebacker, but they needed more speed, more talent. I think the lack of speed and playmaking ability at linebacker the last few years has been really sort of an undersold point that's really hurt the defense. I think Spillane has played a lot the last few years. You wonder if that catches up with him, but I think he's certainly an upgrade over Juwan Bentley, and he fits the culture that Mike Vrabel wants to instill. Really tough player. Juwan Bentley is too, but I just think Spillane's an upgrade. I think Harold Landry, again, a guy Vrabel's familiar with, and should certainly be an upgrade over Josh Uche, who obviously didn't even finish the year with the Patriots, and maybe he's a tougher version of what you would have gotten if you held on to Matthew Judon at this point in his career. And so I just think, and then Milton Williams, right? You don't know what you're going to get from Christian Barmore, but you need to at least be able to bank on something nearing that if you want your defense to be as good as it can be. And Milton Williams obviously is that. So I just think all the moves they made on defense made sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned culture too. That's what stood out most during that press conference. There's adults in the room now, across the board in that locker room. And look, that's not to say that there wasn't before, guys like David Andrews, who obviously, is now out, but and Jonathan Jones and Dietrich Wise as well. All of those guys are gone. Those were adults in the room, but you now have a new crop of guys who not only are veterans, but look, they're willing to come here. And money does talk, of course, but they're willing to be part of this rebuild. So the fact that you can find guys like that, I think speaks to Mike Vrabel more than anything else. And that's a huge component of this free agency period as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, the Vrabel factor, obviously, I will admit I was wrong about this. I said this a couple of weeks ago that I thought they were going to have a tough time unless they were willing to overpay, which they did. I mean, Carlton Davis got $20 million a year.
Yeah.
He set the cornerback market up until today when Stingley signed his deal with the Texans at $30 million a year. But the other thing is Milton Williams got $26 million a year. So they did still overpay. They had to. They had to pay the so-called suck tax. With that being said, though, if Mike Vrabel's not here, I think you guys would agree with me. I'm not sure these guys sign here. I think that Vrabel was a big reason, a proven head coach with a plan, a tone setter, a culture builder, a guy who's been a winner in his career as a player and as a coach. I think that really helped him in this case. Yeah, okay, you can look at the quarterback situation and say Drake May has a lot of upside, potential top 10 quarterback. But and this is not a knock on Gerard Mayo. I've been very careful to say things about Gerard because there is a part of me that still thinks he probably did get a raw deal. But you wonder if Gerard is still here if some of these guys sign. Now, look, ultimately money talks and people walk. They probably still sign, but there's no question Vrabel had an effect on the process, no?
Yeah, Morgan Moses said as much. He point blank said, "You don't need a pitch when you have Mike Vrabel." I believe that was the exact quote. So, yeah, there's a lot of pull there, and that experience is huge when guys are, especially veteran guys, who are now looking for maybe one of their last contracts. The fact they want to spend it with him speaks volumes.
Yeah, and I think Mike Vrabel is obviously the biggest part of this, but I think by all indications are that Terrell Williams is a guy that I think defensive players could really rally around, and I'm sure he played a role in the Carlton Davis signing. And on Carlton Davis, I think yes, the Patriots overpaid for some of these players, but when you really look at the contracts, like it's not ridiculous. I mean, I think ultimately the Carlton Davis deal is like 2 years, $17 million each. So I think you live with that. That's not too bad. Like if it was really 3 years at 20 each, obviously that's tough. But I think once you look further into the contracts, yeah, they still overpaid, but it's not too bad. And I think the guaranteed money is the real story in a lot of those deals, and it's not too outrageous, I don't think.
No, I agree, Dakota, and I'm glad you brought that up because in the end, you have to look at that part of it, the front end of the contract and the guaranteed money. And when you do that math, considering the kind of player he's been, he's also won a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay the year they won it with Brady there. He's an experienced, proven veteran who I think is a very nice complement to Christian Gonzalez as a field corner. They're going to play a lot of man. They got two corners that they can rely on to take away the outside. I think at the end of the day, $17 million a year, not bad for a player of Davis's caliber. Ken Matthias checks in. Thanks for checking in, Ken. Still lacking a top number one receiver. Where does this team go in that route? Higgins is locked up and A.J. Brown. That's probably not going to happen. Who do you guys think that the team will target? Well, Dakota, you mentioned this earlier about, that they'll probably have to look into the trade market to address a wide receiver. I mean, again, it's hard to say, right? I mean, who could be out there potentially that they could target? Obviously, A.J. Brown's name is going to come up because he played for Vrabel in Tennessee, and there's mutual respect there. But realistically speaking, when you think about it, it's going to be hard for them to get that elite level, upper echelon wide receiver in the trade market now. I'm not sure that guy's out there.
No, but it depends on what kind of risk they're willing to assume, right? Like I think Brandon Ayuk, that trade will, could make a lot of sense, especially, a year later after that ACL. They're not going to have to give up as much in the trade, obviously, but they're also assuming some risk. He probably won't be ready until midseason. That's tough, right? But then you look at some of these other guys that people are talking about. George Pickens might shake free after the DK Metcalf deal.
Yeah.
Does he seem like a culture fit for Mike Vrabel? I don't think so. Another player that I think would be interesting to explore would be Chris Olave. Are the Saints going to want to? I think he's up for the 5th-year option, right?
He is, in May.
Are they going to want to give that to him given his injury history? I don't know, but he's a really talented receiver when healthy, and you probably could get him, without having to give up a huge package. But you're also getting someone who's had like 4 concussions, right? So there's a lot of risk there. And then the A.J. Brown thing, I just think. He's obviously an incredible player. That's just a situation where you're probably going to have to give up a ton in a trade. And are you willing to do that with a guy who, he's 28 now? That's obviously still young, but he's banged up every year a little bit too. Obviously can be a little bit of a mercurial personality. So, all of these trades, none of them are really clean, but I also just think the Patriots are going to kind of be forced into having to pull the trigger on one of them. So I'm fascinated to see what happens because I just don't think they can get through another offseason and come up empty. Like, I just don't think they can sell that to the fan base, regardless of how good the free agency period was with the defense, unless they swing big in the draft. But I don't know if Ted McMillan fits that bill either, personally.
Yeah, for me, it's still about the free agents. Look, none of these guys are on the front nine by any means. They're all back nine, probably 14th, 15th hole. But go get a Keenan Allen.
Who's 14, 15 hole?
No, I'm saying they're on the 14th or
right,
15th
but who?
hole.
Like Brendan Ayuk?
I'm getting to it. No, I'm getting to it.
He's on his second contract. He's not on the back nine quite yet.
I know. That's why I said free agents. either Keenan Allen or Stephon Diggs, for me, needs to be an option only because, look, again, are they in a prime? No. But you still need reliable targets. And I don't think these guys are necessarily going to command the balls that they were in their prime. Like, I don't think they're going to come in and be the problem that some people think that they might be. I just think you need to help Drake May any way you can. And I think one of those guys can help. And you're not giving up assets as well. You're just giving up money. So for me, I still think one of those guys, again, it's not a perfect answer by any means. I understand that. You want to get younger. But in terms of a veteran receiver and another good pair of hands, I think one of those guys is still a good option, at least in my opinion.
My thing though is, and I agree with you, like they might have to go that route, right? But Keenan Allen just looked so slow last year.
Yeah.
I mean, he
Oh,
looked,
no, that's fair. Yep.
he was,
And I
yeah,
wouldn't touch Diggs coming off the ACL.
yeah. I mean, maybe Diggs just because he might, who knows, he might still have more juice left in the tank. But like I've seen it now with Keenan Allen, like he has all the hallmarks of your over 32-year-old washed up receiver. And if you just wanted a sort of savvy veteran who can get open, that Drake May can rely on third downs, why wouldn't you just overpay for Cooper Kupp at that point? So if they weren't willing to do it for Cooper Kupp,
I agree with you there.
you know, like why would you do it for Keenan Allen, who also might not even be a good locker room fit based on some of the things that came out of Chicago last year with Caleb Williams? It just didn't seem like that was a great partnership. So, but to your point, Kevin, I mean, they might not have another choice. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Matt Curran checks in. Thanks for checking in, Matt. Ayuk is shifting from walking the course to using a cart with his injury recovery.
Thanks, and I think one quick point on Ayuk that I think, you know, gives me pause on the trade too is, and we've seen a lot of reporting, you know, I've heard the same stuff that the Patriots are, you know, they're hesitant to make somebody the highest paid player on the team that hasn't been here before. Like they better be 100% that they're a good culture fit. And is Brandon Ayuk that, given what we saw a year ago? You know, I don't know. I don't know if they want to make that guy.
I don't think so. He didn't want to be here.
Right. So how can you do it a year later, bring him in the locker room and say, this is the guy that we want to pay more than all of you? And he didn't even want to be here. That's a tough thing to sell to the locker room. You know?
I agree wholeheartedly. And even when you look at the veteran route, if you're going to go the veteran free agent route, you know what? You could sell me on an Amari Cooper. Yeah, he's definitely a step behind where he used to be, but he's a proven veteran. He's a high character guy. He can come in and kind of lead the room. He could still potentially be productive. We didn't really see it last year. We saw glimpses of it at the beginning of the year in Cleveland. He never really settled in once he got traded to Buffalo. But I don't think that Mike Vrabel wants any part of Stephon Diggs. Doesn't fit that culture concept that he's talking about. And Keenan Allen, I'm with you, Dakota. I mean, he is not the player he was 3 or 4 years ago. He's clearly a step slower, can't separate, not the matchup advantage he used to be. Yeah, he's still an upper echelon route runner, but he's a catch and tackle guy. He's not a guy that's going to make plays after the catch. So I think if you want to dip your toes in that market, I think, you know, you're going to have to look at somebody like an Amari Cooper, who I think of that group might probably still have the most left in the tank. We certainly saw it 2 years ago in Cleveland where he had a big season. So, again, it depends, but something tells me that they're probably not going to add to that position until the draft. Could you see another veteran brought in? Yeah, but I'm not sure it's going to be a name. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I would say, I forget I think the deadline's April 1st for the Brandon Ayuk roster bonus. And so I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but basically, like everything I've read from the 49ers writers are like, if there's an Ayuk trade, it's going to happen before April 1st, because otherwise the 49ers would just pay another $21 million and trade him anyway. So it makes no sense for them. They need to get rid of him before then. So that's kind of a important sidebar to this. So it wouldn't, if any of those receivers are traded, I think it would be him before the draft. But I'm with you. If it's not him, it might be a situation where this moves further into the spring and it takes a while to develop.
And I do think I'll say this as well. What would you give them for him? You're not giving up pick 38 in the second round.
No, I think you try and you start with the Matthew Judon third round pick.
Yeah,
that'd be a nice and attach Kendrick Bourne, right? And see what else needs to happen there. You know, I think you could probably do that, and then maybe, you know, if the 49ers are willing to eat some of the money, then you say, well, you attach a fourth rounder next year or something along those lines.
Well, let me ask you guys this. Does Joe Milton come into play?
So funny you say
I
that.
wouldn't put him in the deal.
It's funny you say that
I
because
agree.
this is completely unrealistic, but I was talking with a friend recently, and we were just trying to spitball on wild things to do with the 4th overall pick. And I was like, what if you did the 4th pick and Joe Milton and like Kendrick Bourne for CeeDee Lamb? You know, like what team would be interested enough Joe Milton that you could also attach other interesting assets to get a really good player, whether, you know, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, like those are completely unrealistic. But you know, I do think he could be an interesting asset to attach in those kind of trades if you find the right team.
Yeah, for an elite level player like a Parsons or a Lamb, yeah, he might be what puts the deal over.
Yeah, like what would you rather have the 4th pick? Would you rather have Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter or CeeDee Lamb? Like I think, you know,
Right, the proven commodity.
Right. Yeah. But well, you know, I don't think the Cowboys would want to do that. That's a tough one to sell. But
yeah, no, I agree. You are watching / listening to the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Serenitas, joined by my partner, Kevin Stone. And tonight we're joined by Dakota Randall. Just a reminder, if you're in the market to sell your current home and purchase your next home, purchase your first home or refinance, give our good friend Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846. You can also shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. Of course, the spring real estate season is here. Inventory's picking up, business is picking up. You need experience in your corner. Herb Devine is that guy. Again, give him a call at 781-254-2846 or shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. All right. Now, getting back to the conversation here, Ken checks back in. Is Joe Milton worth a 3rd-round pick, and why would a team give up on Milton in his 2nd season, although he will be behind Mayo? I don't know if other teams are going to view him as somebody that they're willing to give up a day 2 pick for. I'm not sure we're there yet. I think he needs another year, and I'm not sure how much he's going to play in 2025. You hope he doesn't play at all. I'm not sure that there's enough teams out there, considering the fact that he was a 6th-round pick, that are going to overvalue him enough to say, we're going to give you a 3rd-round pick for him. Could it be a team like the New York Giants who need that potential future starter? Maybe a team like that might get desperate. Ideally, I'll be honest with you. You tell me what you guys think. If a team offered you a 3rd-round pick in this draft for him, I would do it. I would take the pick, and now that gives you a ton of flexibility because you'd have 4 picks on day 2. You could really move around that board and really improve this roster.
yeah, I think I would do it for a 3rd-round pick, certainly. Because, you know, I think 2 things can be true about Joe Milton at once. That game against the Bills was that impressive. And I know it was against the backups, but like I've gone back and watched it a couple times, and like he was excellent in that game. Like no qualifiers. And on the other hand, it is a 1-game sample size. Like we've seen that before, Matt Flynn, whoever, right? Doesn't mean anything. But I think it's enough. It could be enough for certain teams where it's like, and this is where I think the Patriots the timing is advantageous to the Patriots because it's a bad quarterback draft. So if you're a team that is like, you know, we don't love Cam Ward or Shador Sanders at high, we're looking more round 2 or round 3. Would you rather have Joe Milton or, you know, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, someone like that? You guys might know more about the college class than me, but like, if I'm another team, like I think I might go Joe Milton there because the talent's real, and that game, if nothing else, showed that he can take to coaching. You know, if nothing else,
he is a far more talented player than a Quinn Ewers or even a Kyle McCord, who I like a lot and I think is more of your traditional pocket passer. I think he's a more physically gifted quarterback than any of those guys. And that's where the strength of this quarterback class is going to be. It's going to be in the middle rounds 2 through 6. That's where you could get some good quarterback value in this draft. But I think if he were in this draft, he would go much higher than the 6th round. I mean, we could potentially be talking about him as a 1st-round pick. Here's the thing. Jackson Dart and Tyler Shuck are in the conversation as being the 3rd quarterback in this class. He's better than both of those guys, in my opinion. Physically, anyway. I think Shuck is probably a little bit further along in his development because he's a 25-year-old and he's going to be a 25-year-old rookie. He's played a lot of football at different schools.
Joe Milton was too, right?
Yeah. But Joe Milton, to me, physically is probably better than those guys. I would say that the only quarterback in this class that could be better than him potentially is probably Cam Ward.
Yeah.
And John, you've preached this for years since we started. It's all about, it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? So it takes one team to fall in love with that tape from a year ago, and now you're off and running. One team falls in love with a backflip, and all of a sudden he's the most athletic quarterback that they've ever seen. So it just takes one.
Well, and that's just it. If I'm a team like the Giants, don't use that pick on a quarterback. See if you could get a guy like him. Offer the 3rd round pick. Bring him in. He could be your potential future starter. Let's say they did sign Aaron Rodgers. So he learns under Rodgers for a year. The bottom line is we obviously don't have access to the Giants draft board and what they think of this quarterback class. But again, I would imagine that their opinion of this class is not that much different than most of the other teams in the league, which is it's a subpar quarterback class. It's not great. I think if Ward and Sanders are in that draft a year ago, they're not going in the 1st round. Maybe Cam Ward might have, but Shedeur Sanders is definitely not going in the 1st round. But they're in this class. So I don't think that the Giants, if they were smart, they would take a look. They would take a long, hard look at it. Now, again, who's to say the Patriots even want to trade him, right? Maybe they don't want to trade him. But the thing is, I'm not sure how long you want to hold on to him for. Because if you hold on to him too long and he's not playing, then his value takes a hit.
Yeah, and I just, I don't know why. I just keep going back to Dallas. Like, I just think so Dak Prescott has 2 years of guaranteed money left on that deal. In 2026, it's $40 million.
Looks like the Trey Lance experiment is over there. So
right, and so it's like that's a good. And I think I actually just looked it up. Dallas owns in round 3 the 76th pick, which is 1 pick ahead of the Patriots pick from the Falcons for Matthew Judon, so they could go back to back. But I just think that's what you're looking for there, because no one's going to trade for Joe Milton with a chance to make him their starter. Maybe a team like the Giants does that. It's going to be more a team like, in my mind anyway, a Seattle that has an established starter, but they're like, this could go south. The Saints, I think, make a lot of sense. The Cowboys, maybe you can, where I know we're getting into just like spitballing trade stuff, but maybe use Joe Milton in a potential trade for a Chris Olave or something like that. I just think those are the kind of teams you try and tackle, because you're taking advantage of a bad QB draft class, and you're finding these teams that for Joe Milton, or for them, Joe Milton makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. And he might be an asset that you need to use to bring in, potentially either a wide receiver or even a left tackle. I know a lot of people will say no one's going to trade you a tackle in this day and age with offensive linemen and where the offensive line issue is in football today, which there aren't a lot of quality offensive linemen in the league anymore, specifically at a premium position like left tackle. But Joe Milton could be an additional asset that you could use in a trade.
Well, let's not forget the last example of this for the Patriots. Jacoby Brissett, after 1 year, was flipped for a receiver in Philip Dorsett, who obviously wasn't a number 1 receiver, but they capitalized on that small sample size and traded him for something that they needed at the time, which is receiving help. So the template's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Philly Dorsett was pretty good for him.
Yeah.
Matt Curran checks back in. Milton is 25, old even for a second-year guy. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. It is. So, and thanks for checking in, Matt. And to that point, that's why I think they should take a long, hard look at moving him if they can.
Right.
If the right offer comes along.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because again, as I said earlier, I think if you hold on to him too long, the market's not going to be there. You want to capitalize on it coming off that game against Buffalo. If a team is desperate enough, potentially they do offer you a 3rd round pick. If they do, I think you need to strike while the iron's hot. Good friend of the show, Bill Vaughn, checks in. I'd hold on to Milton for another year. If May doesn't play 17 games, Pats can showcase him further and maybe win a game or two. Yeah. Possibly. Yeah. Thanks for checking in, Bill. And again, I want to reiterate, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But I do think if by chance, and again, we're spitballing here, if by chance the right deal came along, let's say draft weekend, I do think you'll have to consider it.
No, I think, there is a potentially even stronger case to be made. Like Bill said, to let him play well in the preseason a little bit.
Yep.
Let's see if he gets in, a couple more games in the regular season for whatever reason. Then the value really takes off. But to your point, it's tricky because how many teams are going to want to trade anything legitimate for a 26-year-old quarterback who hasn't proven anything and is another year closer to free agency? That's tough too. So I'm with you. I strike while the iron's hot. You have no guarantee that Joe Milton's going to be worth this much a year from now. Going from a 6th-round pick to potentially 3rd round, like I'm doing that in a second. And if Joe Milton turns out to be, a great quarterback, that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah, and let's not forget they just signed Dobbs too, who they're not the same, obviously, but he's an athletic quarterback as well. So you never know sort of what they might already have on the back burner with him as well.
Yeah. Great point.
Yeah. But again, like I said, I think and Dakota just reiterated it. I mean, he's 25. If there's ever a time to trade him, it's now. You wait too long. Even if he plays well in the preseason, I feel like that star could fade. And then let's say you end up trading him next preseason, you're probably not going to get what you could get right now while that Buffalo game is still fresh in the minds of talent evaluators rather and coaches around the league. Dakota, where do you want to see them go in the draft? Without getting into specific players, they do have the 4th overall pick. Obviously, they still have the 2 biggest needs, which are left tackle, wide receiver. It's hard to say if they can address those 2 needs at 4. It depends on what you think of the prospects and the talent there. But what direction would you like to see them go? Not just with that 4th pick, but in this draft.
Yeah, I think if Abdul Carter falls, then you make that pick. If he doesn't, I'm trading down because I don't know if they're in a position to take full advantage of what Travis Hunter could be. Unfortunately, I just don't. That's a tough one. You don't know. We get into week 7, he's playing too much at corner, and everyone's calling for him to play offense, and it's just messy. Like I don't know. I don't love that fit for the Patriots. And Mason Graham, now that they have Milton Williams and potentially Christian Barmore, I'm not sure that makes any sense. So listen, like you said, you would go receiver or tackle. I just don't think any of the options are worth, number 4. I just don't like any of the prospects there. I do buy into the, Will Campbell's arms are too short. I'm not taking a guy at number 4, given the history of tackles with short arms like that. And if there's a high chance of him being a guard, I'm not taking a guard at number 4, unless they're Quentin Nelson or somebody like that. And I don't know if he's that. So I'm trading down. And then, listen, if you move down to number 9 or 10 and Ted McMillan and Will Campbell are there, that's a tough call. I'd probably lean Campbell. But from that point on, I think overall in the draft, you got to get out of the first 2 rounds with a tackle prospect and another receiver. And from then on, I'm drafting best player available. They've talked a lot about that, getting away from drafting for need. I think the way they attacked free agency on defense is going to help them do that in this draft, where they don't have as many glaring needs as a lot of people think they do. But once they satisfy tackle and receiver, then I think I would like to see them just go best player available and go for talent.
Yeah, for me, it's if you have the choice between Carter and Hunter, you make that decision. If not, you trade down and take best tackle available, whether that's Campbell, whether that's Member, whoever it might be. You need to plug those 2 holes as early as possible. But again, I'm with you. If you're picking at 4, you need to know that is a game-changing, franchise-changing type of player, in my opinion. And I'm not sure tackle is it. So if it's Carter or Hunter, you make that pick and you hope it's the right one. But if you don't have either of those 2 options, you start trying to play the board. And I'm with you. Just start taking best guys available. They can screw this up, but there's almost too many holes for them to screw it up. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they're going to get it right, whatever they do. It's just a matter of sort of drafting, developing, and making that right call when the pressure is on. But if it's those 2 guys at 4, I make that pick. Otherwise, I'm trading down as well.
Yeah, and I think the uncertainty at left guard helps them there too, where, if you get Will Campbell at like 12 or 13 and he eventually turns into like a Pro Bowl guard, I think you're much better with that. Like you're okay with that at that point. And so but I just, again, at 4, that's tough for me.
Yeah. But the other thing is, though, again, there has to be an interest in trading up for the pick. I don't think that interest is going to be there. That's why when they didn't get the number 1 pick, I didn't overreact like a lot of people did because I felt, well, okay, they didn't get the number 1 pick. That sucks. But this isn't a great draft class. So the people aren't going to be, and I know people will say there's still a quarterback at the top. So teams could still potentially come knocking to make a trade for that pick. And they very well could. In the next week, Mike Borgonzi's phone might start ringing off the hook and he may end up trading that pick. I'm not saying that had they lost that Buffalo game, it would have been a bad thing. But if this were a year ago, let's say, and you didn't need a quarterback and you still finished 4-13, that would have been a year to have a top 4 pick because you could have really capitalized on it. Now, since free agency, my position has shifted. I was Team Abdul Carter if he's there. Not anymore. You sign K'Lavon Chaisson. You sign Landry. I don't love Carter as a 3-down player. I think long-term, and yes, I get it. I agree with people. We saw this in the Super Bowl. You can never have enough pass rushers, but you also need guys that can play the run, that can anchor and sink and get their hands on people and set an edge. He really struggled with that at Penn State. If you're going to draft Travis Hunter, he's got to play receiver, in my opinion. He's not going to play corner for you. You have to flip it now. If he sees himself as a corner, you've got to draft him and tell him, you're going to play receiver for us, and you can play some nickel or dime corner in sub packages, but you're not a full-time corner. So I'm okay. I'd be okay with that. It's unfortunate that Campbell's arm length is such a problem because if he has 33.5-inch arms, we're not having this conversation. He's a potential elite level left tackle, and you run the card up there and you don't even think twice about it. Unfortunately, I do think, to your point, Dakota, the arm length is going to be an issue. And if you take him at 4, within 2 years, you could be kicking this guy inside the left guard. And yes, I agree. I think you're going to get a Pro Bowl caliber left guard, but you probably don't want to take him at 4. But I think a lot of this will depend on whether or not there's a genuine interest to trade up. I think if a Carter, if a Cam Ward, if a Hunter's there, they'll be interested in trading up. If those guys are all gone for whatever reason, then you're probably stuck with the pick at that point. And I don't want to hear about Membu. I don't want to hear his name. He's not a tackle in the NFL. He's a guard. They already have a glut at guard and center. You don't need to add another body there. I don't think he's a tackle in the NFL. So,
yeah. And to your point, you know, it's tricky. Like if it's just for a quarterback, like let's say Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders are there at number 4, it's going to be hard for the Patriots to generate like a ton of interest or to any sort of significant return because, you know, look, if you just look at the draft order, Jaguars are 5, obviously not. The Raiders at 6 could make sense. But then after that, it's the Jets. They're not doing the Jets. And then it's Panthers, Saints, Bears, 49ers, Cowboys, Dolphins. Like a lot of those teams have quarterbacks or they don't make any sense. So like if you're the Patriots, the only way I see they pulled off is if they somehow generate some sort of bidding war between like the Raiders and the Saints to make the other think that the other might be trading up for that. But that's it. And I think those teams would just call their bluff. And then if you can't get the hook from the Raiders or the Saints, you're not doing that trade with the Jets, Panthers, Bears, 49ers, Cowboys, or anybody like that. And that even assumes that any of those teams would want to trade up for someone like Shedeur Sanders. I personally don't know what to believe on the Shedeur Sanders draft stock rumor mill. Like I can't keep track of it. I don't know. You know, I think it seems like teams are really split on him, but I just think I don't know if there's any clean trade option for the Patriots if it's a quarterback at that spot. If it's Hunter or Carter, then it's much different, right? You have a lot more suitors. But if it's just a quarterback, I think it might be tough.
Well, I mean, again, as I said earlier, I think if this were a good quarterback class, let's say that this was a year from now and it's Arch Manning that's sitting there. Well, everybody and their mother, by week 10, that you're going to start seeing teams that are out of it or falling out of it. They're just going to fall out of it completely this upcoming season because they're going to want to position themselves to draft Arch Manning, who I do think is going to come out ultimately. I think he's played enough that if he has a really good year, despite the Mannings wanting to slow play this, I think he does come out. All of that being said, this isn't that year. So I don't think the interest is going to be there. I think they'd have more luck getting somebody to want to trade up if Carter or Hunter are sitting there.
Yes.
Because if it's Shedeur Sanders sitting there, at that point, if you're a team like the Raiders, you're probably sitting there saying, well, they don't need a quarterback. Jacksonville doesn't need a
You're just
quarterback.
waiting.
Right. We're just going to wait.
Yeah, I was saying, like, the only way then is you convince the Raiders that, well, the Saints are trying to come up. And like, is that even going to happen? Would that even actually be on the table, or would the Patriots just be lying? And that's not how it works. So you're right. If it's Sanders, I don't really know if they find anybody for that trade.
And I will say this, I think that the Saints could be a player. I'm glad you brought them up, because with Kellen Moore there now, stylistically, philosophically on offense, Shedeur Sanders can do some of the same things Jalen Hurts can. So he's not the runner that Jalen Hurts is, but you can run him on design stuff. He's a pretty good athlete, and he's pretty mobile. Kellen Moore may look at this and say, the Sanders name carries a lot of weight. He can learn under Derek Carr. He fits what I want to do schematically, what I really want to do, what I'm probably not going to be able to do in year one with Derek Carr. So the Saints could potentially be in play for Shedeur Sanders. And the other thing is, you know what? If Dion would not, I don't think Dion would have a problem with that, because they're a team in the South. He'll be comfortable with them. Same with the Raiders. I think he'd be very comfortable with his son playing for the Raiders. But the Saints are one of those teams that you could see potentially trading into the top 5 for one of these two quarterbacks, but specifically Sanders.
Yeah, and I don't think the Derek Carr contract restructure affects that at all. I mean, he still has zero guaranteed money in 2026. We could see the same situation with him that we saw the last couple of years with Russell Wilson getting benched late in the year, and whoever else was this past year that had the benching late in the season for the injury guarantee. So I just think, they're going into the season with Derek Carr as the top quarterback. Even if they draft Shedeur Sanders, maybe they would still go with Derek Carr. But like at a certain point, if Derek Carr needs to be benched, the Saints aren't going to think twice about that. He's not some sacred cow down there.
Best case scenario for the Patriots is, pro days coming up next week. Well, starting this week and all through next week, a couple of quarterbacks go off. They start skyrocketing up draft boards, and all of a sudden, again, John, you've said it, beauty in the eye of the beholder. People start, freaking out, and all of a sudden you have some trade calls.
Yeah, and I think you will. I think once we get into these pro days now, we've already gotten into them. A lot of them are taking place now. Once you get into these pro days and guys work out, if a guy pops at his pro day, it makes a world of difference. It's the final piece of the evaluation process. And so for one of these general managers, one of these coaches, and again, that's why I do think ultimately Sanders does go in the top 10. Some people have speculated that you could see an Aaron Rodgers type of drop. I don't think that's going to happen. You're not going to see that. I think he does go in the top 10. And for a couple of reasons. One, again, he's good enough in this quarterback class to go in the top 10. And the other piece is, I think he is going to pop at his pro day. I think he is going to impress people. Even though you're hearing that the league is split on him, there's some negative vibes about him. I don't think that that's going to matter, because, again, all it takes is one. And that one, like we said, could be the Saints. The Raiders, I don't think, are going to be as inclined to give up draft capital in this draft or future draft capital to make the move, because they could probably slow play this. But a team like New Orleans, if they want their quarterback in the future, they may have to move up and make the move. And I guess we're going to use this as a segue. Ken checks in again. How big of a loss will John Jones, Wise, and Andrews impact this team going forward? Of course, Jonathan Jones and Dietrich Wise both signed one-year deals last week with the Washington Commanders, and the Patriots cut veteran center, 10-year veteran David Andrews. I think that surprised people a lot more than it surprised me, Dakota. I'd love your thoughts on this. I'm not surprised they cut David Andrews. It sucks because all three of us have covered him. We've been around him for a while, and he's a pro's pro, and he's great to deal with, and he's a leader in that locker room. But I'm not surprised with his age, his recent injury history, that they cut him.
No, I'm not at all. And if you remember, right after he was ruled out for the rest of the season, and I think he went on his podcast with Brian Hoare, I think it's called Quick Snap.
Yeah.
He talked openly about how he opted for this specific kind of surgery because it would give him a chance at continuing playing, but there were no guarantees. I mean, if you go back and listen to that, he very much talks like a guy that's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play again, but this surgery was my only shot at doing it. And it sure seems like the Patriots have questions about whether he's going to be able to continue playing. I think he was released with a failed physical designation. So, for me personally, I would be surprised if David Andrews doesn't retire. That's not like inside knowledge. That's just that it feels like that's where it's headed.
Yeah, for me, I think the loss, all three of those guys, I think the loss is bigger off the field than on it. But in terms of on the field, I think Jonathan Jones is probably the biggest loss, just in terms of, again, veteran leadership, communication-wise on the field more than anything. But I feel like Dietrich Wise was sort of taking a step back, and David Andrews obviously was as well. So I think off the field, just in that locker room, I think that's where those guys are going to be missed more so than, in game.
I do think, I think off the field, certainly. But I also just think the way, I think Vrabel makes up for a lot of that. And I think that the staff he's built makes up for a lot of that. And the players they sign in free agency, a lot of those are great culture guys where I think they'll be all right. I think, there are so many new, younger players in the Patriots that don't have any other connection to the dynasty years. I don't think it's a big deal to them that guys who were holdovers from that era were still there. And I think, and Jonathan Jones, great player, great leader, like one of the more underrated Patriots of the last 25 years, but, was more of a led by example type, and you need those kind of guys, but it's not like they're losing a fiery motivator like if Juwan Bentley left or something like that. And Dietrich Wise is very much in that same mold. So that's not to downplay their leadership. It's just they weren't like, huge vocal captains, like the heart and soul of the team. They weren't those kind of guys. David Andrews was that, right? And so that's, we'll have to see how things play out on the offensive line. That's a big loss for them. But the other guys, I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, those guys were more kind of keep it together when it got ugly than they were the rah-rah type.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I think this gives them now an opportunity to see if Cole Strange can be the full-time center. I mean, they're going to have a big decision to make with him in May, whether or not they want to pick up his fifth-year option. So and look, let's be realistic here. They're not going to pick up his fifth-year option.
Right.
I think we can safely say that. But this does give them an opportunity to give him a shot to potentially be the starting center. If he doesn't, plays at a high enough level, perhaps you could end up re-signing him once he hits the market. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts there. You still have Ben Brown. They signed Wes Schweitzer this weekend. So that there's a lot of moving parts there. And supposedly there was a report today that they're still in the market for another center. So, and they may not be done there in terms of free agency. But as of now, looks like it's going to be a competition between Strange, Brown, and Schweitzer. We'll see. Matt Curran checks back in. It sucks he was released, but Pat saw the handwriting on the wall, auditioning Strange at center, trying to salvage that pick. Yeah, no, look, that's exactly it. And, when you go back to those last two regular season games, he played okay there. He struggled at times against Buffalo. He played pretty well against the Chargers, despite the fact that the Patriots got mucked. But I think he showed enough with that 6'4", 307-pound frame that he could potentially be able to survive in there because he's big, he's long, he can anchor, and he can control zero techs that are playing over his head. I think if he shows that he can do that in camp and in the preseason, he could potentially have the inside track to be their starting center. Ken checks back in. Does Bradbury come in for a free agent visit? Yes. I think Garrett Bradbury, who was released today by the Minnesota Vikings, does come in for a free agent visit. He struggled last year, but he fits exactly what we're talking about. A veteran center who's been around, who, by the way, would give them yet another body in the middle of that offensive line. They have a real glut there, in my opinion. They're going to have a lot to sort out there in camp.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, they need depth at center. I think it's possible that Cole Strange could be the answer there, but you can't go into the offseason or banking on that being the case. And really, I think that's kind of like, for me, the story of the Patriots offensive line this offseason. And it's unfortunate for them that, they have all these holes. And yet a lot of the answers might already be on the roster. We just don't know. at right tackle. Right now, it looks like it's going to be Morgan Moses, but like I didn't see anything last year that tells me Caden Wallace can't be the right tackle of the future. I think he played well as camp progressed, and as he got more opportunities over there, he suffered an injury that wiped out basically his entire season. Like I just don't know. It's still entirely possible he could be that player. And Layden Robinson, I mean, he was excellent for long stretches of camp.
He had some played really good well down the stretch.
Yeah, and he had really good games in the season. He had bad moments too, but remember, he also didn't play left guard in college, and he made that switch late in the season. So he was playing a new position. So he might be their answer at left guard. But how could they can't go into the offseason banking on that because there's just not enough evidence there. And then same thing, obviously, with Cole Strange at center. So it's tough for them. They got to balance sort of, giving opportunities to the guys they already have who might be the answer, but also acknowledging like they can't bank on those guys and they might have to be aggressive to get players atop the draft or a trade or sign a top veteran that shakes free in free agency.
We also might be underestimating the coaching. This is not necessarily a knock on Scott Peters, although I guess it kind of is. But
yes, 100%.
Yeah, like we don't know how much better this offensive line can be until we see them working with the new staff and getting in there for OTAs. So I'm willing to see what they have. Yes, I'd like to see a couple more bodies, but who knows? Maybe there is enough there. We don't know.
Yeah, listen, I mean, it's 5 or 6, 5 different offensive line coaches in the last 5 seasons. And for a lot of that time playing with, poor quarterbacks in front of them that didn't help matters. So, I mean, it hasn't been easy being a Patriots offensive lineman the past 5 years. So, which is why it's just, I'm not writing off any guys, but, you wonder how Vrabel and Stretch and all these other guys feel about some of the players. They might be like, we've seen enough of Layden Robinson or Cole Strange, not going to be a fit for us. But for me, I'm like, I still think some of these guys might be really good players.
Bill Vaughn checks back in. What's your thought on Barmore returning? If he does, that would make interior D night and day from last season. Again, thanks for checking in, Bill. We're talking about blood clots here, so it's hard to say what his timetable is and what he will look like when he does return. But there's no question that if he comes back healthy, he plays that 3 technique in their 40 front. Milton Williams plays that 2-eye inside shade of the guard. That's going to be, if not the best tackle tandem in the league, certainly top 3.
And talk about what it could mean for Keon White, too. I mean,
yeah, huge.
Yeah,
they're all their edge guys and their linebackers.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're them, I think you have to go into the season assuming you don't have him. I think you make him or acknowledge him as sort of a cherry on top. If you do have him, it's a golden ticket. But again, John, you said it's blood clots. Like, you're not rehabbing a knee. Like, there's no timetable on this, and you can't rush him back. I think they rushed him back last year, frankly. So if you're them, I think you have to open this season assuming he's not there, and if he is, even better.
Well, we have another question in from Matt Curran from Braden Curran, NHS class of 2030. What's up, Braden Curran? Are there trade prospects at O-tackle left, or is it late draft only? No, I mean, I think, look, here's the thing. I think you could see as many as 5 tackles go in the first round, maybe even 6. There's a lot of talent there. It's also deep enough that you could probably draft a relatively good player that you can develop there into day 2. I think that the issue here is, again, it comes back to Will Campbell and the arm length. And if Will Campbell's arm length is a concern, okay, do you perhaps look at someone, like Kelvin Banks from – my issue with him is he's 6'4", so that could be – vertical length could be an issue for him. You're looking at the bottom of the first round and potentially somebody like a Josh Connerly or a Ariante Irsay from Minnesota. So it all depends on how comfortable they are with these guys, where do they stack them on their board, and if they think that they want to take a chance on a Will Campbell at 4. Remember now, we're talking about a guy that has under 33-inch arm length, so that is an issue. There hasn't been a guy to make the Pro Bowl at that position with under 33-inch arms in 25 years, so that's a problem. It's not so much a problem to me, and I know Dante Scarnecchia. I don't think it'd be a problem for Dante, But to a lot of line guys, it is. You want that arm length because in this day and age, with all those tilt 5 techniques and all those speed rushers now that you're dealing with on the outside, arm length matters. So, again, it will depend on how they evaluate these guys. They can address the position, but again, it's going to depend on how comfortable they are with the guys that are top of the draft board. One thing I will say, they could pull a 2001 here, take a defensive player at 4, like they did with Richard Seymour, at 6 that year, and then take a tackle in the second round, like they did with Matt Light that year out of Purdue. So they could do that as well.
Yeah, that could certainly be in play. And then as far as potentially trading for a tackle, I just that's on another NFL team already. I just think those guys just typically don't become available. Teams don't trade those guys. Like, you gotta overpay big time, and it just doesn't happen. I mean, there are some guys, maybe Charles Cross, Colton Miller, I don't know, that potentially they could shake free at some point, depending on how things go. And I think those guys are into the final year of their contracts, but even still, teams just don't trade franchise tackles. So I think I'm with you. I think it's the draft.
So nothing.
No, I mean, look, you just don't see it happen very often. Like Dakota said it, if those guys are going to be traded, you'd see it far more often. It's too big of a commodity in the league to just have them moving around like that. So, you saw the Laramie Tunsil trade that came out of the clear blue, but you're not going to see that very often. I just don't think a trade is really a viable option.
And I still think the Patriots were in a position to make that trade anyway. Like, that didn't
Right.
that trade wouldn't have made any sense for them. That's a trade that a team that thinks it's ready to make that jump to truly competing this year makes. Where it made sense for the Commanders. Like, they just got really close. They're like, we're ready now. We're ready for that kind of move. For the Patriots, like, I don't think they're in a position to make that kind of move for that kind of player at that age and everything just yet. Maybe next offseason. But I know there was a lot of debate. The Patriots should have been in on Laramie Tunsil. I don't think that made any sense for them. That's not the same kind of trade as going out and getting a Brandon Ayuk or someone who's much younger. So I don't think Laramie Tunsil would have made sense for them.
No, I agree with you. And I do think Washington overpaid for him. They gave up 4 picks, including a 2026 second-round pick. So that's a valuable pick. I don't care where you are in terms of your program development. A second-round pick is a valuable pick. And so I think, to your point, I agree. Patriots, I don't think we're in a position to make that trade. They're not there yet. Maybe a year or 2 from now, they could be. The Commanders are obviously closer to being a Super Bowl contender. But even for them, I thought it was a pretty steep price, considering Tunsil is 30 and he is entering the back 9. So he struggled last year. He's still a name. Not sure it's the greatest deal, but Patriots, to your point, Dakota, we're not in position to do that. Boston College did announce today that their pro day will be next Monday, March 24th. It'll be at the Fish Fieldhouse on campus. It'll begin at 11 a.m. And they did release which players will be working out, which Boston College players will be working out. Linebacker Cam Arnold, cornerback Brykees Brown, offensive tackle Jack Conley, edge Donovan Ezaraku, defensive tackle Cam Horsley, defensive back Kari Johnson, center Drew Kendall, tight end Kamari Morales, edge Neto Okpala, running back Kai Robichaux, wide receiver Dino Tomlin, offensive tackle Ozzie Trapillo, and running back Trayshawn Ward. In addition to those guys, Cole Burdo from Merrimack will be working out, Tajay Johnson, who played at Boston College and then at Buffalo last season, Salvatore Lapoli Jr. from Bentley, and Dylan Poirier, the offensive lineman from UNH. This is as deep and as talented a BC group as we've seen, Kevin, since we've been covering them the last 6 years and since we've been covering the pro day. There's a lot of talent there. Every team in the league is expected to have someone in attendance next Monday. I mean, again, Ezaraku's the headliner, but Kendall, Trapillo, possibly Okpala, Robichaux, there's some guys there that are going to be playing on Sundays beyond Donovan Ezaraku.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Okpala. That's the first name that jumps out to me in terms of
Horsley's another one, by the way.
Yeah, he had a good Reese Senior Bowl, as did Drew Kendall, as well as Combine. So But for me, Paula, we've seen what he can do on the opposite side of Ezeraku. This is sort of a day for him where, again, all eyes are on Ezeraku. But if you can turn some heads, you now start getting talked about in circles around the league. And let's not forget, this is not just for, NFL. This is USFL. This is CFL. This is guys just looking for any
There'll be
opportunity.
scouts from the CFL
Yeah,
there as well.
and even the Arena League too. So, look, some guys might not achieve, their ultimate dream getting to the league, but this is a huge day for everybody involved. So, I've heard most of, if not the full Patriot staff will be there. Mike Vrabel knows Ezeraku well. His son Tyler was here. I want to say 2 years ago now, if not 3. Um, so yeah, it's a huge day, and I also love that BC is helping out some of the other local kids as well. They don't have to do that. The other local kids can go find a different pro day, whether it's Holy Cross or UMass. So good on BC for helping those kids out well as well. But yeah, I mean, the Zion Johnson, Alec Lindstrom pro day, I think was probably one of the more crowded ones we've been at. Zay Flowers obviously had a ton of attention at his as well, but this one's going to be jam packed, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on BC. As far as I know, this is going to be live on ACC Network as well. So it's a big day, and again, Donovan is the show. He's the main event of sorts, but there's a lot of names on that list that we might be hearing on Sundays at some point.
Yeah, and you mentioned the year that Zion Johnson won. Of course, he won in the first round of the Los Angeles Chargers. Zay Flowers 2 years ago goes in the first round of the Baltimore Ravens. Ezeraku's going to be a first-round pick. He doesn't get out of the top 32. I think Ozzie Trapillo's a second-round pick. I think Drew Kendall, Cam Horsley, Jack Conley, those guys could go early day 3. So there's 5 or 6 guys here that you could hear their names called within the first 5 rounds. This is the deepest pro day group Boston College has had, certainly in the time that we've been covering them as well. And of course, Kevin, practice number 4 will be tomorrow morning. Bill O'Brien, Grayson James, and Dylan Longren are expected to meet with the media after practice. Stone will be there covering that as well. So hopefully they bounce back after a tough first day in pads on Saturday.
Tough-ish. I mean, there's some moments, how it goes. It's March.
The first day in pads in March. I wouldn't put too much stock into it.
Exactly.
They're going to be fine.
They will. And I will say, there's something different about this camp. I don't want to say it's more business-like, but every day last year, I think the newness of the Bill O'Brien hire, and Dakota, you can even speak to this, there was a buzz around that hire from people that never talked BC. There was always sort of, hey, what's going on over there? And it's not as much this year. There's a more sort of business-like approach, at least in my opinion. Again, it's only been 3 days. But again, Dakota, you can speak to last year. The buzz is still there. It's just not as much as it was last year. Everybody wanted to know what was going on in Chestnut Hill last year.
Yeah, I mean, I was among the people that I was excited or very interested to watch BC football again. I know a lot of people that felt the same way. I mean, and it's kind of, things change. A year later, I think it's more expectations now. It's like there's not as much of a, is this going to work? Are we going to be all right? Are we going to see the immediate returns? It's like, no, there was proof of concept, and now there's a certain level of expectation going into the season. I don't like to cross sports too much, but it's almost like, I think with the Red Sox in this spring training camp, it's like this is the first time in a while where it's like we're expecting to be good now. There's not a bunch of variables. It's not a lot of mystery or question marks. It's more like it's a professional camp this time around. Yeah, I guess if you remove the Rafael Devers stuff, but it's just a like you said, a more professional, business-like. We expect to be good. We have things to accomplish now. It's not a whole bunch of variables going around. So yeah, I think I've noticed that too. And again, I'm looking forward to watching them this year too. I think Bill O'Brien's really changed everything over there.
Yeah, he has. And look, it will be a different spring ball for them. Of course, they're not going to be doing a spring game. And Bill O'Brien, we saw him speak on Friday night at the Massachusetts High School Football Coaches Association clinic at Gillette Stadium. And he flat out came out and said it, Kevin. The reason they're not doing a spring game is not the reasons you think. The reason we're not doing a spring game is because there was only 5 people there, which I thought was quite the shock. They didn't have a turnout last year.
Not far off.
And I'm sure that did factor into their decision making. But I still think the portal and coaches sliding into guys' DMs factored into this, because that's why Nebraska's not playing one. That's why USC is not playing one. That's why a bunch of these other schools aren't playing a spring game. And those programs get huge numbers at their spring games. The Nebraska spring game is a spring tradition in Nebraska. There were many people, from alumni to fans, that were disappointed when Matt Rule made that announcement earlier this year. Okay? That might not be the case in Chestnut Hill. People might not be crying that the game isn't going to be played, but it's not just because it was poorly attended, and it was. He's right. But I'm sure the portal and the threat of losing guys potentially after spring ball factored into it as well. Kevin, of course, we also got to speak to Joe Harasimiak that night, the brand new head football coach at UMass. Very impressive. If I'm UMass football fans, you should be excited about this guy, because in order to get fans to be excited after replacing Don Brown, who was a legend, in order to get excited, you needed to bring in a guy who can do that. My initial impression of Joe Harasimiak, first time I had ever met him, he is easily the right guy to step in and replace Don Brown and get this program going in the right direction. Very impressive young man. I don't want to rain on UMass's parade here, but if he turns it around, a couple people around the program said to me, they don't know how long he's going to be around. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but he was impressive nonetheless.
Yeah, fantastic person to talk to. I think the biggest thing he brought up was, look, that was not a desirable job for a lot of people around the country. He bought into what they were selling him, which means there's a vision, there's a message, there's a clear edict from up top that we're going to take football seriously. Actions speak louder than words. There's a lot to do on that campus for the football program, but for right now, it's hard not to buy into everything that's being sold if you're a UMass fan.
Yeah, and just some other college notes. Sacred Heart began spring practice today. URI begins spring practice tomorrow. New Hampshire doesn't begin spring practice for another couple weeks. They're going to be primarily in April. Same with Brown. Same with Dartmouth. Harvard resumes spring practice this week after being on spring break last week. Same thing with Bryant. They're back in action this week after being on spring break last week as well. That also includes Merrimack, who is also returning off of spring break, and had a great conversation on Saturday with Warriors head coach Mike Giannetti. Same with Bryant head coach Chris Merritt. So, of course, we'll have full coverage of spring practice. We're going to be starting our spring visits here in earnest. Kevin's already been to Boston College. He's going to get out to Harvard. We're going to get up to Merrimack, Holy Cross, Bryant. You name it. We'll get to as many, if not all of them, as possible. And one final point I want to make before we go here. As we mentioned, Boston College is pro Monday the 24th. UConn is next Tuesday, March 25th. The Rhode Island Pro Day for URI, Bryant, and Brown is next Wednesday, March 26th. And the Holy Cross Pro Day, which features UNH and several of the other local programs, is next Thursday, March 27th. All right, gentlemen, final thoughts here before we wrap it up.
All you, Dakota.
You alluded to it at the top. I'm just ready. I'm ready to go to bed. I've had a long one. I was down in Greenville for the last 5 days for a wedding. I think every night of sleep in the hotel was awful. Wedding activities played a role in that, and then yesterday with all the tornadoes going through the south, our plane couldn't get out of Tampa to come up to Greenville, so we were stranded for 24 hours. Didn't get any financial help from the airline on the hotel or anything. So it's been a long one. So I'm fading fast.
Well, thank you for the time.
Yeah, no, thanks, guys. I love talking ball with you guys, so I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, same here, brother. We enjoy doing it as well. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the New England Football Show. For Dakota Randall and Kevin Stone, I'm John Serenitas.